Welcome to the deep dive, where we try to pull out the key insights from a whole stack of sources, giving you a shortcut to being really well informed.
Yeah, helping you get up to speed quickly.
Exactly. And today we're diving into something truly, well, extraordinary in American governance. A situation that unfolded just recently, August 11th, 2025.
It's quite something. Picture this. The President of the United States directly taking over the police department of a major U.S. city.
Not just any city, but Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, and deploying National Guard troops onto its streets.
It's a really unprecedented move, this assertion of federal power. President Donald Trump actually called it Liberation Day in D.C.
Liberation Day. What was his stated mission?
He said it was to, and I'm quoting here, rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. Strong words.
Very strong. And he painted a picture of.
Oh, yeah. Vivid claims about violent gangs, bloodthirsty criminals. He stressed a need for beautification, too.
Beautification, meaning?
Meaning removing what he termed slums and homeless encampments. He even made a comment about some homeless people being from different countries and that, nobody knew who they were.
And who was with him when he announced this?
He had key people there. Attorney General Pam Bondi, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, right beside him.
Okay, so that's the president's narrative, but almost immediately we heard a very different story, didn't we?
Absolutely. A strong counter-narrative from D.C.'s own city officials.
Like Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Her, and also the D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwalb. They called the whole thing unsettling and unprecedented, and they flat out disputed the president's claims about crime.
How so? What did they say the reality was?
They stated very clearly, actually, that violent crime in D.C. hit a 30-year low back in 2024.
A 30-year low?
Yeah, and that this year, 2025, it had fallen even further, significantly, down by 26%.
Wow. So, okay, you've got these two completely opposing stories. What actually happened here?
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to unpack in this deep dive. We need to pull back the curtain on this really complex situation.
So our mission today is?
We're going to look into the president's reasons, his stated rationale. Then we'll compare that to the actual data, the crime stats, the homelessness figures.
And the legal side too, right? DC's status is unique.
Definitely. We have to explore that unique legal framework that governs DC. And, of course, look at the reactions, from local folks, national figures.
Right. The goal is to give you, our listener, a really solid understanding of what happened, why it matters, and what the potential fallout could be.
Yeah, not just for DC, but maybe for other cities down the line, too.
Okay, so we've set the scene with these really starkly contrasting narratives. Let's rewind to that day, August 11th, and look closer at the president's announcement itself. How did he justify taking such a drastic step?
Well, he formally declared a public safety emergency in D.C.
A public safety emergency?
Yes. And based on that, he stated he was placing the Metropolitan Police Department, the MPD, under direct federal control.
Just like that?
Just like that. And deploying the National Guard. He also appointed someone new to oversee the police temporarily.
Oh, who was that?
DEA Administrator Terry Cole. That's the head of the Drug Enforcement Administration. He was named Interim Federal Commissioner, reporting straight to Attorney General Bondi.
Okay. And the language he used to justify this? You said it was strong.
It was incredibly strong. Trump described D.C. as unsafe, dirty, even disgusting.
Disgusting. Right?
Yeah, claiming it was overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs, and homeless people. Really painting a picture of, chaos.
Did he give any specific examples?
He did. He mentioned an alleged attack on someone called Edward Korestein, who he identified as a former staffer from a Department of Government Efficiency.
Okay.
And he also brought up the killing of a congressional intern, using these, very specific, very vivid incidents to really hammer home his narrative.
And you mentioned this wasn't just about crime fighting, but also beautification.
Right. That was a big part of it. He talked explicitly about clearing homeless encampments from parks, from public spaces, fixing potholes, cleaning sidewalks.
Why the focus on that? On cleanliness?
His reasoning was that a dirty capital leads to a lack of respect for the country. He even added that bit about some homeless people being from different countries and nobody knows who they are.
Interesting. So a mix of crime and aesthetics.
And it wasn't just about D.C. either. He made that pretty clear.
What do you mean?
He issued a warning, basically saying these actions in the Capitol, just the start.
Oh, really? Where else?
He suggested he might do similar things in other big cities, specifically mentioning Democratic-run cities like Chicago, New York, L.A., Baltimore.
And did he mention specific policies he'd target?
Yes, he specifically brought up changing cashless bail laws.
Ah, cashless bail. That's been controversial. Can you briefly explain that?
Sure, it's a policy where defendants are released before trial without having to pay money bail. Critics often argue it increases crime, while supporters say it makes the system fairer, less biased against the poor or minorities. It's definitely a major political flashpoint.
Okay, so we've heard the president's side, the strong rhetoric, the rationale, but as we sort of hinted at earlier, the official story isn't always the whole story.
Not by a long shot, usually.
So let's pivot now. Let's look at the data. What do the numbers actually tell us about crime and homelessness in D.C.?
This is where it gets really crucial. According to the MPD's own preliminary data for this year, 2025, overall crime in D.C. is actually down 7%.
Down 7%. Okay, and violent crime, that was the big focus.
Violent crime is down even more, down 26% compared to last year.
26%. That's a huge drop.
It really is. And just to give more context, violent crime in 2024, it hit a 30-year low.
So the trend was already going down, even before this.
Exactly. The current rates for 2025 are even lower than they were back in 2019, before the pandemic. Yes, there's a spike in 2023, that's true.
Okay.
But the data clearly shows it's been decreasing consistently since then. So this big gap between the rhetoric and the stats, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It immediately makes you question the stated reason for this federal intervention. Seems like there might be something else going on.
Feels like there could be a political angle beyond just public safety, yeah.
And what about homelessness? That was another key part of the justification.
Another stark contrast. We looked at data from local groups like, so Others Might Eat, they go by some.
Right, I've heard of them. What does their data show?
Their figures indicate homelessness in D.C. is down significantly over the last 5 years. Almost 20% for individuals, and get this, 43% for families.
Down 43% for families. That's remarkable.
It really is. And these groups, some and others like them, they're actually working on the ground.
So what's their take on the president's plan to clear encampments?
They strongly argue it's not a real solution, not long-term. They say just moving people out forcibly cuts them off from the very services and programs that are helping them get back on their feet.
So it just pushes the problem somewhere else, potentially making it worse for those individuals.
That's their argument, yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't solve the root causes.
Now, what about the people who actually live in D.C.? What did they think? Was there any polling on this?
There was a Washington Post Shar school poll, quite revealing.
Yeah.
It found that, yes, crime is the top concern for D.C. residents. About 21% said so. But the perceived seriousness of crime, that's actually gone down compared to previous years.
Interesting. So even though it's a concern, they don't see it as getting worse.
Apparently not overall. But here's the really striking part. 71% of residents felt the president was getting too involved in local D.C. issues.
71%. That's a huge majority.
Massive. And even higher, 77% said they were extremely concerned about threats to take over the local government.
So you've got the federal government stepping in, claiming an emergency, and nearly 3/4 of the actual residents saying, hey, wait a minute, this is too much.
Exactly. A profound disconnect, like you said, between the rhetoric, the data, and what people in the city actually feel.
And just circling back to that beautification angle.
Right. Trump also really emphasized that a dirty capital reflects badly on the country. He compared D.C. unfavorably to other world cities.
So it's also about appearances, making things look perfect for visitors, dignitaries.
That definitely seems to be part of the motivation, alongside the crime narrative, this sort of aesthetic concern for the capital's image.
Okay, this whole situation just screams questions about jurisdiction, about authority. How can a president just, take command of a city's police force? This leads us into the legal stuff, right? DC's unique status.
It does. And it hinges on a very specific and frankly rarely invoked piece of legislation. Section 740 of the Home Rule Act of 1973.
Home Rule Act, Section 740, never heard of it.
Most people haven't. It allows the president to take over the MPD, the police department, for federal purposes if, and this is the key part, special conditions of an emergency nature exist.
Okay, special conditions of an emergency nature. Who decides that? The president.
That seems to be the interpretation used here. But there are limits built in.
Like what?
Well, the president can act unilaterally for only 48 hours without telling Congress.
48 hours, then what?
To extend it beyond that, he has to notify specific committees, House Oversight and Senate Homeland Security. And even then, It's capped at 30 days,
Only 30 days.
unless Congress actually passes an act, a new law, to allow it for longer.
And you said this Section 740 is rarely used.
It's putting it mildly. This is the first time it has ever been invoked quite like this.
What?
We're in completely uncharted territory legally.
Wow. Okay, now what about the National Guard? That's another piece. Usually the Guard reports to state governors, right?
Usually, yes, but not in D.C.
Ah, so D.C. is different there, too.
Exactly. The D.C. National Guard is unique because it falls under direct presidential control. The mayor doesn't command it.
So the president can just deploy them within D.C. without local consent?
Legally, yes. And there's another twist, the Posse Comitatus Act.
Right, that's the law that usually stops the military from acting as domestic police.
Correct. But there's a legal opinion from way back in 1989 suggesting that maybe, just maybe, Posse Comitatus doesn't apply to the D.C. Guard in the same way.
A legal gray area, then.
A significant one. And it's actually being tested right now. There's an ongoing trial in Los Angeles about a similar Guard deployment for civilian law enforcement.
So the outcome of that LA case could have big implications for this DC situation.
Absolutely. It could set a major precedent for how federal power can be used in cities, especially regarding the Guard.
Okay, so we have these complex legal justifications, the Guard deployment. What did this actually look like on the ground in DC? How many troops? What were they doing?
Around 800 D.C. National Guard soldiers were activated in total. But importantly, only about 100 to 200 were expected to be actively supporting law enforcement at any one time.
And what kind of support? Were they making arrests?
No, their duties were described as mainly administrative logistics,
Yeah.
providing a physical presence. They weren't expected to be out there openly carrying rifles or making arrests themselves.
Okay. And weren't there other federal agents involved too?
Yes, definitely. A surge of federal law enforcement started over the weekend before the announcement. We're talking about 450 officers.
450? From where?
From 18 different agencies. FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, that's HSI Capitol Police, Park Police, DEA. A real mix.
And were these extra officers or were they pulled from other duties?
Some were apparently pulled from their regular jobs, potentially even including counterterrorism operations, to focus on D.C.
And how would people know who they were?
The plan was for them to be clearly identifiable wearing a uniform, a badge, or a jacket, indicating their agency.
So it sounds dramatic, this federal control, but you mentioned earlier it's not a full takeover of the city government.
That's a really important nuance, yes. While the president can, under these specific laws, take operational control of the police and deploy the D.C. Guard.
It doesn't mean the mayor and city council are suddenly gone?
Exactly. It's not a dissolution of D.C.'s entire local government. For that to happen, Congress would have to step in and actually repeal the Home Rule Act, basically take away D.C.'s right to self-govern.
Okay, so this is specifically focused on policing and security using these emergency provisions.
Correct. A target intervention, however unprecedented it might be, not a complete dismantling of local government.
Right. Given how unusual and, frankly, controversial this all is, the reactions must have been intense. Let's start with Mayor Bowser. How did she respond?
Well, first off, she apparently wasn't even told about Trump's plan beforehand, which is pretty remarkable in itself.
She wasn't notified.
Wow. Seems not. Her public tone was diplomatic but firm. She said the city would follow the law and cooperate, but she definitely voiced deep concerns about the intrusion on autonomy.
Did she link it to the push for D.C. statehood?
Absolutely. She used this moment to really hammer that point home, arguing that statehood is the only way D.C. gets full control over its own police and its National Guard, just like any state.
Makes sense. What else worried her?
She warned about losing community trust. You know, if people see law enforcement as an outside force, it could really damage relationships built up over years.
And did she say anything about who the police chief reports to now?
Interestingly, yes. She made a point of saying the MPD chief still reports to her deputy mayor, sort of asserting a continued, albeit challenged, local chain of command.
Okay. What about the D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwalb? You said he was strong.
Very strong. He called Trump's actions unprecedented, unnecessary, and unlawful. He didn't mince words.
Unlawful. Is he planning to sue?
His office stated they were considering all options to protect residents. So yeah, legal challenges seemed very much on the table.
And what about Democrats in Congress, especially those representing D.C. or nearby areas?
Strong condemnation there, too. Eleanor Holmes Norton, who's D.C.'s delegate, and Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland. They were furious.
What did they call it?
Norton called it a historic assault on D.C. home rule. Raskin called it a textbook authoritarian maneuver.
Strong language. Are they planning any action?
Yes, they announced plans to reintroduce legislation aimed at giving D.C. control over its own local forces, including the National Guard.
Then Raskin made another point, didn't he? Connecting this to something else.
He did. He drew a sharp contrast between Trump sending forces into D.C. and his recent pardons for some January 6th rioters who had actually assaulted police officers, highlighting what Raskin sees as a contradiction.
Were mayors in other cities watching this? Did they react?
Oh, yeah. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass spoke out pretty strongly.
What did she say?
She called it an overreach of presidential powers and basically a stunt. She even compared it to federal actions taken during immigration protests in L.A.
And Baltimore's mayor.
Mayor Brandon Scott also pushed back, pointing out that violent crime in his city is actually at record lows and calling Trump's focus on cities a distraction.
Okay, so lots of opposition. Was there any support for the president's move locally?
Well, the D.C. Police Union chairman, Gregory Pemberton, did offer some agreement.
On what grounds?
He essentially said, yes, something needs to be done about crime. He pointed to over 800 police vacancies in D.C.
800 vacancies, that's a lot.
It is, and he blamed what he called radical activists on the city council for creating systemic problems within the department.
But what about other mayors nationally? Was
Yeah.
there a unified response?
The Democratic Mayors Association put out a statement. They were highly critical.
Calling it what?
A political charade.
Yeah.
And they made the point that crime is actually down in many cities, despite Trump's policies, they argued, not because of them.
Right. And there's one more piece to this puzzle, isn't there? Something about the D.C. budget.
Yes, and it's a really significant backdrop to all of this. House Republicans haven't restored about $1 billion in funding for D.C. that got cut earlier.
$1 billion. That's a huge hole.
Massive. And it creates this potential crisis where D.C. might have to slash essential city services,
Yeah.
including, ironically, the police department itself.
Wait, so the federal government is intervening, claiming a crime emergency, while at the same time, Congress is withholding funds that could actually help the city address its own issues, including policing.
Exactly. It creates this incredibly awkward, almost catch-22 situation for the city.
Facing potential cuts from one side, federal intervention from the other, based on data they dispute.
It adds a really deep layer of tension and, frankly, complexity to what's going on.
So, wrapping this all up, what does this deep dive really tell us? What should you, our listener, take away from this?
Well, I think it starkly reveals this fundamental tension in American governance, right? You have the federal government stepping in, asserting direct control over a local area.
Based on emergency claims that directly contradict what local officials and the actual data are saying.
Precisely. And it really throws a spotlight on D.C.'s unique and often quite vulnerable position because it's not a state.
It also forces you to think about the balance of power, doesn't it? Not just for D.C., but maybe for other cities, too.
Yeah, what happens when federal power and resources are used to tackle local issues, especially when local leaders disagree and have data showing a different picture?
So, given all this, the conflicting data, the legal questions, the reactions, what's the big thought to leave people with?
Maybe it's this. What are the long-term consequences for democratic self-government, for civil liberties, when these kinds of emergency powers are used to override local control, particularly in really sensitive areas like policing or homelessness, where local approaches might already be working or trying to work?
And maybe, how does an event like this shape that ongoing, really passionate debate about D.C. statehood, about its quest for full self-determination?
Exactly. Lots to think about there. How does this moment change that conversation going forward?
Yeah.